Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I am Sage from Terra Nova Acres.
And I'm Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Today we're going to be talking about how to get serious about growing your own food. But before we get into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about your week, Mickayla?
This week, I have been really focused on, and I know you're going to call me crazy. I know everyone's going to say that we're crazy for this, but looking towards spring and what I'm going to be growing. And immediately after we recorded last week, I went and sat down, was up till like 2 or 3 in the morning, going through seeds, my seed stash, making a list of what I needed to order. And I got all of my seeds ordered I got almost all of my seeds ordered for spring. So that feels really good. Check that off my list. I needed more seeds than I thought I did. I thought I was like pretty well stocked, which I do have a lot of seeds, but I still had to spend way more money than I had wanted doing that. And because we're putting this episode out, I was like, well, before I tell people to go buy a bunch of seeds, I need to buy my seeds. So I got them all ordered. I got my garlic planted this week. Half of it. I need to plant a little bit more in the next few days. So that was pretty close to being on schedule, but this fall has been super warm, even though we got an early frost. So I don't know, the temperature timeline is perfectly fine. They'll be fine out there. We took a lot of time this weekend and cleaned out the chicken coop and the duck coop, and we got them on some deep bedding for going into winter. We have a layer of mulch at the bottom and broke into our new straw that we got a couple months ago, or last month. Yeah, so I feel like we're starting to check things off for like winter things. Things are slowing down a little bit as far as like house projects and big project things. So it's like a lot of little stuff, and the evenings have actually felt kind of relaxing lately, which is not something that I've experienced in a very long time. So it's weird, but I'm enjoying it. I'm like, wow, this is nice. I can be excited about the homestead stuff, not just projects in the house. Like I can enjoy the house and like relax at night, and think about what I want to do for the garden and not be just like absolutely overwhelmed with everything that I have to do. We ended up losing another chicken this week, which was a bummer. This was the first time that it's been like a predator issue, and it was Cinnamon, one of my favorite chickens. I was really bummed about it. This happened yesterday. I found her when I was feeding the birds in the morning. She did not have a head or a neck. She was laying in the middle of the garden. Just there were feathers everywhere, and it looks like what happened was we put her back in the fence because she's the one who constantly gets out of the fence, and she must not have gone into the run and in the coop with everyone else, and once it got dark, and so she was in the netted area still, and it looks like a raccoon just like dragged her out of it through the net and, did its thing, which, yeah, super sad. But we've been trying to take some more precautions since then, the last couple of nights, and we'll just keep up on that and try and keep a better eye on them and get our fence shored up and everything. But I don't know. There's not much we can do. Like, she's the one who decided to stay outside, and she likes to sleep in the tree sometimes, and we try to avoid it. We try to get her back in, but it's just something like we put her back in right before dusk, and we didn't know she had stayed outside. So, yeah. And then the last thing that I did this week, right before we started recording, was I finally finished processing our apples. And I'm so glad to be done with those. 24 bushels worth of cider and applesauce and apple butter and pie filling. I still have to add the spices and some apple cider to the jars after we're done recording tonight, but everything's in jars and in the fridge, like ready to go. I can pop it in the canner in the morning. So yeah, that was pretty much my entire week. What did you get up to this week?
I had a pretty stressful week. I'm still getting over whatever I caught that was like 2.5 weeks ago now. I don't necessarily feel like that body sick feeling, but I just cannot stop coughing, and it just feels like it won't work its way out of my system. So although I'm mostly better, it's still just kind of a constant low grade irritation in the background that just, slowly drives you a little bit crazy. Also, had some issues with my water well, so I'm not on residential water. I'm on groundwater. That's what I drink. That's what's connected to my entire house. And it was an issue that stemmed back to the storm. So when the hurricane came through, lost power for like 2 weeks, and the well system, when we lost power, lost pressure for an extended amount of time, and that caused a bunch of issues. It stirred up sediment in the well, which got into all kinds of equipment, and long story short, needed a couple things replaced, including the pressure tank. So that was a whole saga. It was like the water went out, and I share it with my neighbor, so they were also trying to fix it, and ultimately were the ones who got it fixed. But thought we fixed it, water went back out, and then it was kind of on and off, and then it was, we should just cut off the power so it doesn't mess up the pump, which is a much more expensive issue. So it was like days of kind of having water, but also not having water. It should be fixed now, fingers crossed, knock on wood. But we're like, what, eight weeks out from the storm, and they're just kind of these little things. And then a similar issue with my internet, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but I work from home. I do a lot of things connected to the internet from home because I live out here, and I need to be connected to the rest of the world to earn money and do other things. So the internet going out because of an infrastructure thing that was kind of a temporary fix after the storm and that needed to be upgraded. Had to call out my internet people twice. First guy couldn't figure it out. Second guy figured it out and said, "Oh, actually, I can't fix it. I gotta call somebody else." So that took multiple days to get that addressed. So my week hasn't been great, to be real honest. But hopefully most of the issues are fixed now and or are resolving, and I won't deal with them in this upcoming week. But more specifically, Homestead related, I also went through and figured out my seed orders and went ahead and ordered my seeds after we got done recording last week. And so I ordered from xoxo Seed, which is local, Johnny Seeds, and Botanical Interest. That's who I went to this year. Did not go to Baker Creek this year for various reasons that I won't get into, but I am excited about having more local seed on hand. That's cool to me. And then on top of ordering seeds, I had I had been working on saving seed kind of throughout the year, but before that first frost hit, I had pulled some flower heads off of plants, and I kind of just put them inside so they could dry fully, and they had been sitting there for a while, and I finally got to the point that I was like, I should process these. So I did that this weekend. I kind of tore up the flower heads and put them in a bowl, and then went outside and separated the seeds from all the other parts, which was an ordeal, and I got petals and dust and whatever else all over me, and I'm sure my neighbors were like, what are you doing? But that felt good. That felt good to put some free seeds away to plant next year. And they're all open pollinated in the sense that I don't know what they were crossed with. So even though I know the plant that they came from, I don't necessarily know for sure what I'll get out of it next year.
What seeds did you save this year?
Oh gosh. I saved a few tomato varieties. I saved a handful of pepper varieties. I did some green bean varieties. I think I have 3 different green beans. I saved some pawpaw seeds, like some really random stuff's in there too. But what I just processed was a bunch of zinnias and celosia. And then I actually found another stash of zinnias on a different table and some rudbeckia, so I need to do that too. I just found that like 45 minutes ago, actually.
I have like a handful of brown paper bags, like lunch brown paper bags full of zinnia and marigold seeds that I need to separate the chaff and everything from and get them packaged up because I want to give them to friends. Be able to, like, whenever somebody comes to get eggs, I want to be able to give them a little packet of seeds and stuff because I have so many. But yeah, it was nice to, I felt the same way. It was nice to like not have to purchase not a lot of them. There was just like a few seed packets that I didn't have to buy because I have so much saved seed. Like I don't need to buy cilantro or coriander seed, marigolds, zinnias. I saved some of the dahlia seeds, like the actual seed from my dinner plate, like big cafe au lait dahlias. That's exciting. I'm curious to plant those and see what happens with that. It feels good to be stocked up on the seeds for the year for sure.
Yeah, if you need any flamingo celosia, I gotcha. There's more celosia seed than I could possibly plant.
I think that we're gonna have to set up some sort of little seed swap this year because I have so many that I need to give to people because I have like way too much of specific ones, and I think it'd be fun to swap them. And I know that probably we could get a handful of people together to trade some seeds.
Oh, for sure. On the topic of all of these different varieties and garden planting, let's get into the actual topic today, which is how to really get serious about growing your own food. We talk a lot about gardening, and we've given you guys a lot of information. But in what we've talked about so far, we haven't really delved into the details of if you're really trying to optimize production, if you're really in a place where either groceries are getting expensive for you and you need to just find a way to save money on that and you're looking at growing your own food. Or maybe you're getting a homestead and you actually really just want to dive into it, and maybe you've grown food before, but not really at a large volume, not really looking at, okay, how do I feed myself from the land? So that's exactly what we want to get into today.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time when we are talking about gardening, we have it as such, we approach it as such a hobby and a lifestyle and is something that brings us joy that we don't necessarily approach it as like doing it the cheapest way possible always because I don't know, it's something that brings us joy and also like for the most part we can afford our food, but I think I think that there is something to say about basically like subsistence gardening, like doing it because you need to feed yourself. And I can honestly see like going into the next year, people becoming a lot more interested in gardening again, like they did in 2020.
So if you really are looking at trying to grow a lot of your food, the first place to start, and really it's the first place to start whenever you're thinking about starting a garden, is figure out what you eat. And that will get you started in the right direction and figuring out what to grow.
And another thing that we consider often is the space that you have to grow in. So if you are someone who doesn't have a lot of space to grow, or you're just getting started with a new garden from scratch, you're not going to want to grow something that's going to take up tons and tons of space if you want to be able to provide some sort of variety to yourself. So going to the store or looking online and seeing what is easily accessible and cheap to buy in bulk from the store, those are things that you don't want to grow yourself. Even if it's something that you can get in bulk from the farmer's market or a local farm store, like we did with tomatoes this year, don't grow that in bulk. So, for example, rice is something that takes a lot of infrastructure and knowledge to be able to grow. That's something that like I don't even know if I'll ever tackle that, because that's like daunting to me.
Same thing for me with like dry beans. I can grow that. I know how to grow that. I even have the space to grow that, but it's not worth it to me because I can go buy a bag of dried beans at the store for $1.50 or less than $1. So for me personally, I know, okay, I'm good with getting that at the grocery store. I don't need every single ounce of my food to come from my garden because it's just not realistic, even when I am looking at a situation of how do I grow the most food possible. Part of that is recognizing what is just not efficient to tackle. There are some things that, trust me, it's just better off to rely on other people who have much bigger infrastructure. Uh, let them grow that for you.
Another good example of that is corn. Corn is so cheap to buy in season, and you can usually find some form of organic corn too, if that's something you're concerned about and interested in buying. But it takes up so much space in your garden for what you're getting out of it, and it can be kind of finicky to grow if you're not used to growing it. I guess it takes, at least it took me a couple tries to be able to grow it successfully. And something else on the dry beans train for me is like soybeans. I like growing soybeans for edamame, but if I were to try and grow it for drying and using to make like Taylor homemade tofu or something, that is not worth it to me. If I was short on space, I would much rather just go and order or buy a bag of soybeans because they're really, really cheap to buy, even if you buy organic ones.
I've tried to grow soybeans to keep dried soybeans on hand. I've done it 3 years now, and every year I ask myself like, why did I do this? I didn't need to do this. And every year I make the same mistake again. And I think now that I've done it 3 times, I think the third time was the charm. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm not doing it again. It's not worth it. Trust me.
I've seen a lot of people who will grow like bigger patches of things like that in order to supplement or to make their own chicken feed. And that's really interesting and intriguing to me. But that, again, it's like a different level of gardening if you're getting into that. So if you're just trying to like focus on something that's going to really provide you with food without too much hassle, or the question of whether or not you're actually going to get fruit off of it, I would avoid dried beans, corn, peanuts. That's another like novelty thing that I think of that's like, it's fun to grow, it's cool to have a patch of it, I want to have it in my food forests, like fruit tree guilds. But if I were trying to grow enough to make myself peanut butter for the year, like that's just unrealistic in a smaller space. Another consideration is growing things like melons, squash, and pumpkins, things that vine out a lot. If you only have a limited amount of space, or you're trying to focus on one thing and do it really well, don't do a huge variety of those things. Choose one or two, choose a melon, a squash, a pumpkin, or just choose one of those things and focus on growing it well. Because they're heavy feeders, they sprawl and take up a lot of space, and they will provide you with a lot of food. But if you have too many of them in one space, they're going to compete with each other. You might not get as much fruit off of them, and there's the greater potential that the bugs are going to get to them, the pests, or mildew, powdery mildew, fungal infections, all that kind of stuff. So if I only had like one trellis, I would just choose like butternut squash to grow, or like honey nut squash or something.
So now that we've told you everything not to do, or cautioned you, we're rule breakers here. Take everything we say with a grain of salt if you want to. We're not going to hold it against you. There's 3 different main approaches to look at when you're trying to figure out what makes sense for you. So there's what you can get the most volume of food from. There's what you can save the most money from compared to if you had to buy it at the store. And then there's things that are going to store well for you longer term, because if all you grow is lettuce, that's great, but that's not going to last more than a week. So some of these categories have overlap. There are things that we will bring up more than once, but those are the three general categories that we're going to be looking at.
I'm curious, when you think of all three of those categories, what's the first thing you think of?
Productivity, cost effectiveness, and store as well.
Yeah, like combined.
I think that would be the winter squashes, which, like, we just told you, hey, maybe that's not for you. So, again, it's going to depend on your situation, but especially something that is pest resistant, like a butternut squash. Those things are usually bred to store really well. They have that pest resistance. And if you go buy a butternut squash at the store, you might spend $6 or $7, even if it's not organic. So that's definitely the first thing that comes to mind for me. What about you?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say butternut squash because a lot of
Yeah.
the time it's sold by the pound, and the heavy things like that, that's where that gets you. So I was going to say exactly that because it stores so long. It's a lot of food that you get from not a lot of plant, and it's going to save you a lot of money if you grow it yourself because you're not paying that price by the pound.
I guess if I were to pick a second one, since we both have the same answer, maybe herbs, and only because you can dry them and store them for an extended amount of time. And they do take a bit of a time investment there. So they're not going to be necessarily really productive the first year. Something like basil could be. But most of the herbs that you're going to save a lot of money on are going to be the perennials, so things like rosemary and thyme, those things that stay in the ground to come back and get really big if you take care of them. When you look at how much money you can save harvesting off of even one plant versus what you spend if you have to buy that at the grocery store, and then if you dry it, it keeps, I mean, it'll keep for however long, but you probably want to use it within a year, which is still a great storage life. It's the storage life of most things, before those aromatic things that make them what we enjoy putting in our food are going to break down.
Also, I just feel like I need to throw this in there. If you are listening to that and you think, oh, okay, next time I go to the produce section, I'm going to pick up some of those herbs in the pots of soil to plant in the ground. Don't do that. They're going to die. Those things are not meant to stay alive. Like, you put them in any form of real sunlight and they're going to crisp up so quickly. So go to like a local nursery or wait until the big box stores put out their seedlings and stuff for the spring season, because those will do much better than anything from the produce section. Something else that's going to be super productive is summer squashes or zucchinis. Even if you deal with a lot of the pest pressure like I do in my garden, if you plant enough of them, you'll get something off of them. And if you keep up on it, if you don't have too many, you can usually harvest some stuff off of them. I think that's one of the more productive garden varieties you can grow is a summer squash, and they have a really quick turnaround time. You can get food off of them really quickly. And yeah, they're known for being so productive that people can't give enough of them away.
Yeah, there's a reason that we have recipes like zucchini bread that wouldn't normally, in my opinion, wouldn't normally make sense. It's because when you do have them and they are healthy, they're so productive that it's a lot to keep up with. It really is. Another one that comes to mind for me for productivity is green beans. I tend to get those in main flushes, so I'll succession sow them if I want to keep them in season all year. But green beans, I mean, I don't have nearly as much pest pressure with those as I do with a lot of my other plants. And as long as they're in reasonable soil, they do really, really well.
As long as the deer aren't eating them. Because I didn't get any
True.
this year because Another really good one that I could think of is potatoes. Even though those are a little bit more of a time investment, they're going to last you in storage longer, without having to like preserve them in any way. You can just cure them and let them be and eat them as you need them. Those are a really, really good one if you are, say, going into winter. If you grow them later in the summer, going into winter to have for caloric density. If you're trying to beef up meals or stretch meals, potatoes are something really good to have around. That is not one that's like crazy expensive at the store. depending on which kinds you're getting. But once you get into the groove of growing potatoes and like cycling the seed potatoes with the ones that are sprouting and like getting them back in the ground, you could, in a lot of places, I feel like you could grow potatoes almost year round.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that I would call this a productive plant, I mean, if you get really great at growing potatoes, maybe you can turn, a chitted potato, which is maybe a quarter of a potato, into 5 or 6 potatoes, but it really is the caloric density. It really is, a handful of potatoes going to fill you up way more than a handful of lettuce. So even though it might be the same volume, it's not necessarily the same thing. Another really productive plant is tomatoes. I will say this one's kind of hit or miss. Even though it's a common garden plant, there are a lot of things that can go wrong with tomatoes. So at least in my experience, it tends to go one of two ways. They're really happy, they're really productive. I get a ton of tomatoes, or they're really unhappy. They have a lot of fungal issues, they have a lot of pest issues, and I don't get that much. So that one's not foolproof. There is kind of an asterisk next to that one. But when you have happy tomatoes, I mean, I look back at the photos of how many tomatoes I had last year, and they were just covering my kitchen counter. Like I couldn't do anything in my kitchen because there were so many tomatoes, and that's a great problem to have in my opinion.
I think another thing to note about like tomatoes, potatoes, and green beans in particular, squash too, but all of these things are super versatile. Like you can have green beans with any meal. You could make tomatoes into so many things. You could toss potatoes into pretty much any meal. Like the versatility of them is another key factor, at least for me.
Switching gears from productivity to cost savings, one of the first things I always think of is lettuce, really any sort of greens. We've talked about this before, but I mean, how expensive is the tub of mixed greens at the store? When I go look at it, especially the organic ones, they're like $7. And then you put them in the fridge, and then 2 days later, when you pull it out to make a salad, half of them are slimy and going bad. So, growing that in your garden, harvesting it as you need it so that it doesn't even have a chance to go bad like that, I've saved so much money. I've saved, I'm not kidding, hundreds of dollars growing my own lettuce instead of buying it at the store. And that's kind of crazy to think about.
It's also something that's really easy to save seeds from if you do, like once it does get too hot in the season and they bolt, you can either save the seeds from it or just let it drop its seed and it will regrow itself later in the season. So you don't even have to think about it. I have two beds that just like regrow lettuce for me and I don't have to think about it anymore. Just like a little trick here is if you order seeds online from somewhere, pretty much everywhere that sells seeds, if they give you a free seed packet, it's a lettuce seed packet. So it's like usually a lettuce mix. So I know MI Gardener, usually Botanical Interests, and a couple others that I can't think of right now. I always get a packet of lettuce seeds in my orders. So like I will never have to order lettuce seed again because I get it for free almost every time I order seeds. I have so many packages of lettuce seeds. I want to give them away because there are too many free mixed lettuce seeds.
Whenever I get free seeds, I feel like I always get a hot pepper that I would never eat in a million years because I don't enjoy hot peppers.
Okay, well that's Baker Creek who does that to us, not everybody else. To be fair. But Botanical Interest and MI Gardener, they always send a free packet of lettuce. It's like a mixed green. And it's like they do it literally every time, so it's a very specific packet. Like it says free seed on it. Like it's labeled as that because that's just, it's so abundant. So if you're ordering seeds from somewhere and you want lettuce, order from one of those couple of places and you'll get free lettuce seeds. We already talked about herbs being cost effective. Buying those little clamshell packages of them at the store, it's minimum $2 for like 3 sprigs of whatever you're gonna get. Usually they're like $4. So yeah, herbs are one of the biggest bang for your buck when you grow them in your garden, especially if you can grow them from seed. Some of them are kind of harder to grow from seeds though. So starting with a like seedling from the store is going to cost you as much as those 3 sprigs. And you could, if you take care of it and you let it perennialize in your garden, you can get free herbs for the rest of your life from that thing.
And tomatoes is also on our list of cost-effective produce, even though we just talked about it. But think about how expensive the, heirloom tomatoes are, those really big, really colorful, really fluted tomatoes that you see in the store, especially in the summertime. Those things, like $3 or $4 each. And that's the price of a seed packet. You can grow 20 tomato plants for the price of one single tomato at the store.
I think I took a picture of it last spring. It was like a package, like a plastic wrapped package at Aldi of 2 heirloom tomatoes from, I don't know where, probably, I think it was like Mexico or something, but they were tiny. They weren't even very big. And it was $5 for 2 little tomatoes because they were heirlooms. And I was like, this is insane. I cannot believe that somebody would buy this. They didn't look very good either.
Yeah, I mean, we are spoiled a little bit because we're gardeners, to be fair. I acknowledge that. If I couldn't grow tomatoes, I might spend $5 on those 2 tomatoes. That might be worth it to me.
I don't know. They didn't even look very good. Like I would much rather just, if I'm going to buy store-bought tomatoes, I'm just going to buy Romas. Like they're the cheapest and they're easy to deal with. Like they don't have the thick core and everything. So I just always just, if I have to buy tomatoes, I buy Romas. Okay, moving on. Anything you can get seeds of that come in like a sprouting pack. So when people do like sprouts, like bean sprouts or microgreens, I guess is more commonly what it's called now, they're super trendy. You can find microgreen packages, like bulk packages for really cheap. And those are just normal seeds that people grow in their kitchen and then they eat them when they're super tiny. But you can keep growing those and grow them into big plants. So I did that this year with snap peas, actually snow peas. And I have so many seeds left over. They turned into these beautiful large plants. I gave a bunch to my birds. I ate a ton fresh in the garden and put them in stir fries and stuff. So anything like that, that's going to be a really good bang for your buck. Not necessarily that they're going to be crazy expensive in the store, but you're going to get a lot of seeds in one big package for really cheap.
Another one is peppers in general, but even more specifically, bell peppers. Those things are, what, $4, sometimes $5, depending on the season, for a single pepper. Again, when you think about that in terms of a seed packet and what you can grow in your own garden, that one singular fruit is going to be the same cost as a whole packet of seeds. And you can actually harvest the seeds from that bell pepper that you buy at the store. If you don't want to do both, you can save the seed from the bell pepper that you cut up. You take a little bit of a risk knowing what pepper you get from that, but it's probably going to be another bell pepper. And you can plant that in your garden.
I've heard other gardeners before call pepper plants money trees because they are usually so productive. You get like lots and lots of fruit off of them. And yeah, if you think the cheapest bell peppers I ever see are like $1.50. And that's just like the green pepper, like a standard green bell pepper, not organic or anything. That's at Walmart or Aldi. So yeah, you can like one pepper for $1.50, or you could buy a package of seeds for $2, $3, $4 and get lots and lots and lots of peppers. Another thing that kind of goes along with that is carrots. Carrots aren't necessarily expensive in the store if you're buying them just like the standard bags, like one or 5 pound bags. They have different sizes. They're not crazy expensive, but if you wanted to get into any interesting ones like the rainbow carrots that they sell in the little bundles, those can get really expensive. And carrot seeds all cost the same when you buy them in seed packets. It doesn't really matter which variety. They're all pretty similarly priced. And so you can get all of the really cool colored ones, and they all have different flavors, and the flavor of fresh homegrown carrots is like nothing else. Like that is one thing. I feel like carrots for me are how tomatoes are for other people. When somebody's like, "Oh yes, like the flavor of the sun-ripened homegrown heirloom tomato is the best thing on the planet." That's how I feel about like biting into a carrot from my garden. They're so flavorful.
Garlic is also a great one. If you take a head of garlic that you buy from the store, or if you get seed garlic, you can take that head of garlic and multiply it tenfold or more. It's however many cloves of garlic are in that head. And garlic is also not one that I think of as a super expensive thing on my grocery list, but if you cook with enough garlic like Mickayla and I do, maybe it does start to add up. But it's so easy to grow so much more garlic when you start from those bulbs. It really does multiply very quickly.
I actually calculated the amount of garlic that I grew last year, like how much it would have cost me. And I think I spent maybe like about $100 on the garlic seed. Like I grew a lot of garlic. And if I were to have bought that much organic garlic, it would have cost me like, I think it was like over $500 or something. So it's more garlic than I needed, but it was like, I saved a lot of money in my mind. And like you can turn it into garlic powder if you don't use it all fresh, or you can mince it and put it in your freezer. So like if you grow way too much like I do, and you're worried about it being wasted, you can just use it as seed again, or you can preserve it in other ways. It definitely is. If you're buying like organic garlic or high quality garlic from like the farmer's market even, that is a huge savings. The next one, I don't know, it could go either way because it is a bit of an investment up front in terms of both money and time. But if you are in the position to invest in any sort of fruit, so berries of any kind, whether that's strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, all of the things, or trees like apple, peach trees, some of those things are going to take quite a while before you get to harvest from them. If you think about how much it costs to buy things like apples and berries in the store, those can save you so much money once they get going. Like you will have so much fruit, you will not know what to do with it.
Berries are one of those things that every time I walk into the produce section, I'm like, that sounds so good. And then I look at the price and I'm like, never mind.
Not that good.
Not worth it.
Especially, I feel like if you have kids, like little kids who eat berries, that's such a thing that toddlers devour berries. Like they could just live on berries. And so if you're in that position, buy some strawberry plants. You can harvest from them the first year. People say you shouldn't do that. I harvested from mine the first year and they're fine.
I think what's cool about strawberry plants in particular is that they will take over. So even if all you have is $20 for the initial investment, that doesn't mean that you're only stuck with that many strawberry plants. They will send out what are called runners, and they will establish themselves. They'll take over if you let them, and so that's again a great problem to have.
And they're really cheap. Strawberry plants in particular. I feel like all of the other fruits are kind of more of an investment. You can get 50 bare root strawberry plants for $10 in the spring. So that's a lot of time planting.
Where do you get your bare root strawberries?
I get them at Gurney's.
I want to know. Ah, okay. Learned something new today.
They do sales every spring, and they do like, so I mean, some varieties are more like you'll get 25 or 50 for $20 or $25, but a lot of them you can get like 25 plants for $10 or 50 plants for $10, and that's really worth it. Like then you'll have plants forever if you trim your runners.
Yeah, I guess one money saving tip for really any of the fruit trees or fruit bushes or whatever is if you are looking to get into that with as little upfront cost as possible, look at the bare root options. And for trees and berry bushes, that's usually going to be in late winter. It's not going to be when you think about it. Strawberries are also kind of earlier than maybe would come to mind. But just a little tip. I know that you will see those things at big box stores, especially strawberries. You'll see a pot of strawberries for like $15. That's not the only way that you can get them, but you might have to look it up online and have them shipped to you.
Usually you can order those a little bit earlier. Like, I think you could start ordering those, and they might not ship until spring, but you could start ordering those in like January, February online. All right, moving on to the category of things that store really well. We already mentioned at the top of the episode that butternut squash in particular, but winter squashes store for prolonged periods of time if you cure them, and they don't require anything other than sitting on your shelf, which is really, really nice. And something else that kind of goes along with squashes, winter squashes, is pumpkins. I know a lot of people will like carve them for jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween, and then they just like toss them or compost them or whatever. But if you keep them whole, you can also just set those on your shelf and crack one open whenever you are feeling like you want a pumpkin pie or whatever else you make with pumpkins.
Yeah, you can. Those are cool because you can do them sweet or savory. You do have to add a decent amount of sugar usually if you're gonna turn it into something sweet like a pumpkin pie or muffins or whatever. But there's no reason that you can't throw those in with like your normal roasted veggies or your other savory things, which isn't really something that I considered before I grew pumpkins. But then I grew pumpkins and tasted them and was like, oh, this is much more vegetable-y than I feel like has been marketed to me so far.
Yeah, I mean it's just like a round, like a really big sweet potato. Like they have very similar flavors.
On the topic of sweet potatoes, those also store really well. And that will always be one of my favorite vegetables, and I do actually enjoy growing them, and I have a whole bunch sitting on my shelf curing right now that now that I think about it, I need to put those into paper bags. Just another thing to add to my to-do list, right? But sweet potatoes, those will store for a whole year. They do require a little bit more work to cure them. You have to keep them within a certain range of humidity and kind of hot, actually, to get them to the point where they will get to their optimal storage condition. But even if you can't do that, they're still going to store decently well for you. And I love eating on those all year. Plus, you can then turn that around, grow slips out of them, and just put them right back in the ground.
And we already mentioned this earlier, but regular old potatoes, as long as you keep those somewhere dark, like zero access to light, they'll last a really long time in storage.
And bringing up garlic again, that's the same thing. Once they dry out, once they get to their optimal storage condition, those are also going to keep really well for you.
Garlic is something where it kind of depends on your location for which kind you're going to grow. There are soft neck and hard neck varieties. I won't get into like the crazy details here. You can look that up for yourself, or I'm sure we have an episode talking about it somewhere. But soft neck garlic typically stores longer than hard neck garlic, if that is something that you're like a quality in garlic that you're looking for. Hard neck garlic is grown more in colder climates than soft neck garlic is, but I think either way you could probably get away with growing either if you're not getting like crazy cold.
Bringing up one that we've heard from already again, which is carrots. And actually, the trick here, at least the trick that I like to use, is that in the winter, because it doesn't get super frigid here, at least not usually, I can actually store my carrots in the ground over winter. I don't have to harvest them. The tops might die back, and that's okay. But because my soil doesn't stay frozen for significant periods of time, I can just basically use the ground as a giant root cellar and pull them out as I need them.
If you are somewhere that's colder and you don't have like a dedicated root cellar or extra room in your fridge, you could keep them in sawdust or sand in like totes. You could keep them in your garage, somewhere that stays really cold, but not necessarily freezing if you're not able to leave them outside fully in the garden. And then onions, that's something that, again, depending on the variety, can store for a very long time over winter, and that's like a major staple. Like I use onion in almost every meal. So being able to have that around and not have to buy it is really nice, even just for the convenience factor of knowing that like I don't have to add that to my grocery list is really cool.
If I can ever figure out how to grow onions in this garden, I will celebrate that. When you're looking at really getting serious about growing a lot of your food, one of the things that comes along with that is growing from seed. You do not have to grow from seed. I am not going to sit here and tell you that in order to do this, you have to go through and master this whole other element of gardening. If you want to grow a lot of food, you can still go buy seedlings. So, with that disclaimer out there, we are going to talk just a little bit about seed selection because growing from seed is a great way to grow a lot of your food without blowing the budget. And so when you're talking about seed selection, that's a topic on its own, but there's just a few things that we want to highlight here. One of the main ones being you're going to hear hybrid and open pollinated and maybe even heirloom when you're looking at seeds. So just to review what those are. Hybrid is a hybridized variety. So typically hybrids are great because they are just vigorous, really healthy plants. Sometimes they're hybridized for specific reasons, like pest resistance. But just in general, they're going to be productive. They're going to be a little bit healthier. But the drawback to that is you won't be able to save seed from those plants and still have the same exact plant next year. If you save a hybrid tomato plant, you're still going to grow a tomato the next year. It just might not be the exact same variety that you had the year previous. And then the other side of that coin is going to be your open pollinated varieties. So open pollination can refer to a few different things when you're talking about seeds. So open pollinated can be you don't know if it was cross pollinated with something else, but open pollinated also refers to, for the simplicity of this conversation, a plant that's not hybridized. It's its own thing. You can save seed from it and you can get the same variety from it, assuming it doesn't get cross pollinated, which you can isolate it if you really care about all those things. Again, that's a whole other topic. We're not going to get into that. But the benefit to open pollinated plants is that you can save that seed, that you're not having to buy it every year. And that's something that I'm trying to get better at. That's just not something that's really been a priority until this year. And so it maybe it'll take you a little bit to get to the point where you care about seed saving in that way. But hybrid, great, strong plants, can't save the seed and get the same plant. Open pollinated might not be as strong or as pest resistant, but you can save the seed from it. That's a really oversimplified explanation, but that'll get you started.
And if you're someone who kind of gets overwhelmed with that information and you're not really interested in the nitty-gritty details of that kind of stuff, it's okay to just go online or go to your big box store and grab the seeds that they have. They usually only have one or two varieties of different ones. That's perfectly fine. They're going to grow well for you, as long as you take care of the plants. But I think about it especially with hybrids, the plants being bred for different strengths. A lot of the times, if you go on like Johnny's, you will see exactly, if you look at the hybrids, they will tell you exactly like why, like what they're bred to be resistant for, or like they resist these bugs, they resist this disease or whatever. And if they're not hybrids, if it's something like an heirloom, even just reading the description will tell you the characteristics of that plant, of the fruit that you're going to get from it, and why it was bred to be that way. So you can find that information on websites, like seed store websites, or you could find it on the seed packets themselves, even the ones that you get at Lowe's, Home Depot, or Walmart. They'll have that information, or at least a little bit of information that tells you the characteristics of that plant. A lot of the times with heirloom varieties, it's more likely that they're bred for flavor or some characteristic that's not necessarily like their storability or their production. It's more for like how interesting they look, or their color, or their flavor. Hybrids are more likely to be bred for production, disease and pest resistance, or like the produce you buy in the store for being able to withstand shipping and transferring to like farmers markets or something. I think recently Sage and I have talked about getting local seeds, finding local seeds this year as much as possible, because that's something that we're both starting to care more about and be interested in, because local seeds are going to be something that even if you don't have a ton of variety with your options, like we're buying from So True Seed because that's local to us this year. They might not have like 500 varieties of something, but they have maybe 10 varieties that have been adapted to our area over time. And that is a characteristic that should not be overlooked. If you can find seed that's adapted to your climate and adapted to similar soil to yours and similar pests and whatnot, those seeds are likely going to do way better than any other seeds that you buy, because they're used to being in your climate.
Yeah, and when I think about the seeds that I've selected up until this point, I have been really focused on more of the flavor side of things. I've been okay with the trade-off of, this might not be the most productive or healthy tomato plant, but the handful of fruit that I get from this, I'm going to really enjoy that. And this is really the first year, in this round of seed shopping that I just did, this is really the first time that I have said, I'm starting to care a little bit more about production. I've gone through trial and error of growing multiple things now, and especially with brassicas. There are some things that basically, if I'm gonna get any reasonable harvest from that, I'm gonna have to start relying on things like hybridized seed that's been bred to be harvested faster or whatever else. I'm starting to get a sense for what makes sense for me. And so a lot of the stuff that we're going over, it's going to depend on the individual. It's going to depend on you. So as we're going through all of this, I hope that you're taking what makes sense for you and leaving what doesn't.
And I guess just one more note on that. When we say local seeds, I just want to go back to that also includes saving your own seeds. So if you get to a point, or if you are at a point where you're interested in starting to save your own seeds, or even saving seeds from a pepper that you got at the farmer's market, that's a huge step in the way of seeds that are well adapted to your area and will likely do well for you and be more productive. But I definitely agree with you on the fact that I am starting to be more interested in the productivity. Not that I'm not interested in the flavor. I am interested in the flavor of things. I am interested in the pretty things, the cool characteristics of all these plants. But when you take the time and effort to plant so many of these, I don't know, brassicas that are so easily demolished by something, or the summer squash, the zucchini that get so easily destroyed by squash bugs. It gets to the point where like I'm putting all of this effort in year after year. I need to see the production. So it's okay to compromise and get like a hybrid seed even if you weren't wanting to do that originally. It's fine. It's going to give you food and it's still going to taste delicious.
And we kind of touched on perennials like apple trees, berry bushes, strawberries earlier, but really that becomes its own category of things when you look at growing food. So although you can grow perennials from seed, usually you're not going to. So for the most part, the seed conversation is going to be for the annuals, the things like tomatoes and the things that you have to plant every year. But there's a whole other category of food that is perennial. It comes back every year. You're not having to buy new seed every year. You're not having to plant it every year. You plant it once, you take care of it, but really you can kind of forget about it. And so that's obviously beneficial because they're less energy intensive. The trade-off there is they do tend to be more of a financial investment up front, and it can take some time to see food from these things. But when you look at the perennials that can feed you, again, if you really want to get serious about growing your own food, these are going to be things like any variety of fruit trees or even nut trees. I have planted, I don't know, maybe 20 fruit trees since I moved here. Some of them are still alive, some of them are not because of lessons that I've learned. and I've gotten 3 peaches and a nectarine so far from lots of money and lots of time. But next year I'll get more. The year after that I'll get more, and that's really gonna compound. And eventually, if I'm still here, I hope I'm still here, I'm gonna have more fruit than I know what to do with from those trees.
It's very much a hurry up and wait situation with perennials like that. Like, you really want to get them in the ground as fast as possible because you know it's going to take 5 years before you're getting like substantial amounts of food. And then you just have to sit there and like twiddle your thumbs and wait. You're like, when are you going to give me my peaches? But that's pretty common with like especially fruit and nut trees. There are some other types of perennials that you can plant on your property or in your garden that will give you food faster than that. So we have a little list of those just in case you're wanting to maybe invest in that those long-term plants and the long-term food security, but you don't want to wait quite that long. The first one I could think of was artichokes. They can perennialize themselves up to a certain point. They don't like too much cold. So if you live in like zone 3, they might not work out for you. But you can still grow them the first year and treat them as annuals. But for a lot of places like where we are, where I was in Michigan, I think I was in zone 6, they'll perennialize themselves up there even.
I do have some artichokes, and I will say the one consideration there is that you're just not going to get a ton of food from them. Like, they're going to take up a decent amount of space, and it's not going to be a super hearty meal that you're going to get from them, but it's food that you can grow. They're beautiful too. And so if you're looking at establishing perennials, that's definitely a great one.
Yeah, put it in your landscaping. They have really pretty flowers.
Another one is sunchokes. I have not grown these, but I know that they are infamous for being incredibly productive. I also know that they're infamous for kind of taking over. So if you do plant those, maybe that's something that you want to put in a container first before you decide if you want to have that in your garden forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
I have sunchokes in a container this year, and I think our soil, the clay soil here, lends itself well to that because it kind of keeps them under control. They don't spread as easily. I've heard people say that if you're going to plant them in the ground and you have chickens, plant them along the edge of your chicken coop because they'll kind of keep them in check. And they really like them. So that's another consideration. But those will give you a lot of food if you let them do their thing. Something I invested in our first year here was a huge 4-foot by probably like 40 or more feet worth of space in asparagus. I got the crowns, like the bare roots in the winter, kind of like I did with strawberries. I actually ordered them together because they are companion plants for each other, and you have to wait a couple years before you can actually heavily harvest from them. But once you plant asparagus on your property, you will never not have asparagus on your property.
See, that's one that for me goes back to the know what you eat so you know what to grow. I totally understand why people grow asparagus, but that's just something that I'm never going to plant because I don't really eat it. It's never something that I'm like, man, I'm super excited for asparagus. So I'm happy for
Well,
you, but I don't want any.
something else to consider with it, even if it's not your favorite thing, it is really good food security because, like I said, it will never leave your property once you have it. And it's very prolific. And it's one of the first things that comes up in the spring. It's like one of the first major things you can pull out of the garden in heavy yields in the early spring. So if you're again worried about food security, that is a really, really good one to plant. And it doesn't take tons of money to invest up front. They're pretty cheap to get. And a lot of the times there are sales online if you want to order them in January, February, and they'll ship them to you in early spring whenever it's appropriate for your growing zone.
Another plant that's going to come back every year is rhubarb, which is also not really one that I super love, so I'm probably not ever going to get to the point that it's worth it for me to invest in it. But I think that's also another one that's a pretty early season one, right? And then you can force it as well. You can do something like set a terracotta pot on top of it. Side note for this one, the leaves are poisonous. The leaves are a no-go for eating, but the stems, the stalks, are what we eat, and they pair really well with things like strawberries. I mean, strawberry rhubarb pie is probably one of the first things that I think of when I think of rhubarb.
Yeah, there's a specific way that you're supposed to harvest it. You like pull the stalks out and you don't break them off if you want to keep the plant prolific. You can look that up online. Watch a YouTube video on it. Don't eat the leaves. But that is another one that's really good if you are in a northern climate. They don't like the heat. They don't do very well down here in the south. It's not necessarily like a super popular thing down here. I was really surprised by that. I didn't realize that until we moved down here, and I was like, where is all the rhubarb? It's spring. How do I buy this? And nobody sells it. Apparently it's more of a fall thing here, which is really interesting. But yeah, if you're more northern climate or cooler growing zones, rhubarb will do really well for you. The next one is kind of leaning back towards the fruit tree bush situation, but it's a vine, and that is grapes or any variety or any version of a fruiting vine like muscadines we have down here is a really common thing. They obviously need some sort of trellising system if you want them to be able to really thrive, but you can do something like that pretty affordably, and they're going to give you a lot of fruit and not make you wait as long as a standard fruit tree would. I think grapes will fruit for you well within a year or two of getting them in the ground.
Yeah, that's one that I've only ever failed at. I haven't really tried. I kind of half-heartedly threw a couple in the ground and was like, "Oh, they didn't work out. Oh well." So I don't have a ton of experience with grapes, but in my grandmother's garden when I was a kid, she had muscadines and scuppernongs, and I would always have those, and they were always so good because that was the only place I could get them. Because can't really find those. But yeah, maybe one day I'll have grapes. All right, we've talked a lot about different kinds of food, but we should also talk a little bit about some of the tools that you can use at your disposal to increase your productivity or extend your growing seasons. So, in terms of taking care of your soil, maybe you're like myself and Mickayla, and you're starting with soil that is not exactly ideal. I started with really compacted, really nutrient deprived soil. Mickayla contends with really clay heavy soil. And so we both have our battles. And for those reasons, we have had to use tools to help us. Yeah, if we really wanted to, we could have just planted straight in the ground, but we would not have gotten the same harvests and we would not be able to put up as much food if we hadn't done it. So really the main tools that you're going to look at are going to be a tiller. Now we do advocate for no-tilling methods, and so tools like a broad fork or a tilther are also going to be more popular in terms of the permaculture side of things, especially if you're into organic growing and that sort of stuff. The no dig or no till methods are going to be a little more popular. You're going to see those around as well. So I personally use a broad fork. I used a tiller just a little bit to regrade my garden because I was not going to rent heavy machinery. So I tilled it enough to move the dirt out of the way. But broad fork is something that I use pretty much every year.
Any of those things are going to be a little bit of an investment. So if you're trying to do this and save money, I would maybe reach out to people on like local Facebook groups or something like that, like the Nextdoor app. See if anybody has those in your area that you can borrow. I'm sure that somebody would let you borrow it, or they would bring it over and use it for you and help you do it, if not necessarily just like lending it to you. So that's a way you can do that without spending a bunch of money. I personally would love a broad fork, but they're currently like the cheapest one I can find is like $120 right now, and that's kind of crazy. They do really good work, but again, you gotta look at the investment.
Another piece of advice is to look around and see if there are any tool libraries in your area. I know Asheville has one, but that was honestly the first place that I ever heard of it. I didn't really even know of that as a concept, but it makes sense, right? You go to a normal library for books. Why not have the same thing with sort of communal tools? Typically, there's a fee to join those, or sometimes you can trade volunteer hours, things like that, for access to those things. But that's also something that might be in your area.
Along with the tools, there are a few other ways that you can invest in your infrastructure to sort of extend your season either earlier on or later into the fall, or allowing shade if you get really hot summers. So you can do something like low tunnels. Sage has low tunnels. You have them for quite a few of your beds now, don't you?
I do, yeah. I use them for things like insect netting to keep insects off my plants, even if it's not keeping them warm, keeping them cool. I've used them for shade cloth on my lettuce. I've used them for frost fabric. I've used them for small little greenhouses. They're great. I love my low tunnels.
I'm gonna be building some for myself this year. This winter, actually. I think that's my January or February project. And mostly the reason I'm doing it is to have a visual barrier around my edamame and my green beans from the deer. Because I tried out some of the like cheap fiberglass little low tunnels, and the deer just kind of stomp all over those and they get underneath them and break them. So I'm going to invest in some nice low tunnels this year. But those are something that you can do depending on how many you're trying to make, like for how many garden beds, you can do that fairly affordably.
Yeah, I think something that's really common is making them out of 1/2 inch EMT conduit. So it's a 10-foot hollow length of metal pole. And I have a 6-foot hoop bender, which will bend that 10-foot length of EMT conduit into something that measures 6 feet wide, so I can put it over my beds that are 6 feet wide. You can also commonly find them in 3-feet hoops and 4-feet hoops. But typically you will have to invest in the metal for the hoops and the hoop bender. I'm sure you could buy pre-bent hoops, but those are probably going to be a little bit more expensive if they are that sturdier material.
And then something else that I think we're both investing in this year is high tunnel and greenhouse situation. Those are going to be a little bit more costly, but depending on your approach and what you're trying to do and how in depth you're trying to go with your garden, if you have a huge garden like we do, they might be worth the investment. Whether you're trying to have a space to start your seeds a little bit earlier or just expand your seed starting setup like I am, or you're looking to be able to actually grow some of your plants like your tomatoes in a high tunnel, so that they aren't as susceptible to something like blight like Sage is going to do this year.
And you can treat those also as you can plant in ground, you can start your seeds in there, you can plant annuals in there, but if you're in a place like, for example, for me, I can't grow citrus trees because it gets too cold in the winter. But I'm not at that point, but in theory, if I had a greenhouse set up, I could plant citrus trees in the ground in that greenhouse, and that would allow me to have access to food that I otherwise couldn't grow here. So it's a season extender, it's a zone extender if you want to use it that way. These tools, yeah, they require investment, but they're really versatile and they can seriously increase your food production.
I also think that over the last handful of years, since more people have gotten interested in growing their own food, there have been a lot more developments in like affordable versions of these things. Like whether you like where they're coming from or not, Amazon has cheap options for this. Like I'm probably going to get an Amazon greenhouse in the next couple of months to set up in my garden because I want to be able to start my seeds.
But if low tunnels, high tunnels, polytunnels, greenhouses are just not something that you're in a place to invest in, that's totally fine. You can also do something as simple as invest in frost fabric or pull out your old sheets that maybe have a couple holes in them that you're not going to put on your bed. But throwing any sort of frost fabric, any sort of fabric covering over your plants when you do have those really cold nights is also going to extend your season. You don't have to invest in a whole bunch of fancy tools. There are so many ways that you can utilize what you have and use it to grow food.
So this episode is coming out initially during the holidays. I think it's December 16th that it's coming out. So if you have people asking you what you want for Christmas, or if you end up getting some sort of monetary gift for Christmas and you're wanting to grow your food in the next year, I highly recommend putting that money or gift cards or whatever towards seeds or fruit trees or some sort of infrastructure for setting up a garden. That is a great way to kind of do this and not have it cost you a ton of money right out of your wallet if you're getting these gifts anyways and you are either interested in growing food or you're concerned about food security in the next year or so.
And if this conversation has left you wondering what those more concrete numbers look like, we've given you some semblance of ideas. We put together a couple episodes actually about the cost of homesteading and delved into really, really good detail specifically about gardening. And we will link that episode in the description below if you want to go check that out and you really want to get a sense of what the numbers actually look like. Highly recommend checking that out.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.